Here we are, one more time, talking about worship. Much of what's called worship in churches is not worship. It's just the truth. We see in Genesis 22 the ingredients of true worship. Abraham is told by God, take your son, give him back. Abraham obeys. He goes to Mount Moriah. He gives his son back. Just when he's ready to plunge in the knife, God stops him. But Abraham said something interesting to the two servants. He said, stay here while I and the boy go yonder and worship. The first time worship is mentioned. What are the ingredients of true worship when it is first mentioned? Number one, in true worship, God's word is a priority. In true worship, obedience is to be my activity. In true worship, God's method is my responsibility. Involved in true worship, inconvenience is a reality. And lastly, involved in true worship, surrender is a necessity. Did you hear that? Surrender is a necessity. Look at what it says, verse 5. And Abraham said to his young men, abide ye here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. Well, what was that all about? He's taking his son, he's going up the mountain, and he's giving him back to God. That's worship. Worship is when I see the necessity of giving back to God that which I value greatly. Abraham loved his son, but he was willing to give him back to God. Surrender, the most precious possession you have, in this case, his son. And God says, give him back to me. When I am willing to give up that which is dearest to me, that's when worship is happening. Maybe it's your position you need to give up. Maybe it's the fact that you are a singer and you have talent. Friend, don't rely on your talent. Be willing to give it up for Jesus should he ask. I don't care what it is, my friend. You may be the worship leader in your church. And maybe someone else is supposed to have that position. Be willing to give it up. Can you give it up and still sit in the congregation and be a participator instead of the leader? Do you have to have it all? Are you going to go to church if you're not the worship leader? Are you going to go to church if you're not the preacher or the teacher? We must be willing to give up that most prized possession. Maybe it's a bad habit. Maybe it's some kind of bondage. You need to give that up to God. The worship that this man was involved in was the giving back to God of that which was special and precious to him. I think, friends, it's time for us to ask ourselves a question. Am I willing to give up something very precious to God that he's asking me to give up? I and the lad will go yonder and worship.